There have been around 275 successful companies come through the competition. Those companies have raised $4.6 billion in funding.
Welcome to another episode of Forging the Future. And today I'm speaking with Brad Burke, Managing Director, Rice Alliance for Technology and Entrepreneurship. Rice University is actually the #1 graduate entrepreneurship program in the United States for 2022. So thanks for being here, Brad.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. It's a great honor to be here.
Actually, it's even more than 2022, right? I mean, it's not the first time.
It is more than 2022. I was going to correct you. It's 3 years in a row. So
wow.
We have a three-peat, 2020, 2021, and this year.
That's incredible. And I think most people would be surprised to learn that Houston has the #1 graduate program. And I believe we have the #1 undergraduate program as well.
We sure do. The University of Houston is #1 undergrad, and I think they've been #1 or #2 for maybe a decade.
Wow.
So they've been ranked high up for a long time.
It's my alma mater, actually, U of H.
Oh, super. It's a great school. They have a great, they're ranked #1 in the undergraduate entrepreneurship program, and they have a terrific program there. So it's neat to see.
Yeah, I went there for electrical engineering, maybe back before they really got rolling on that. But I'd have to get in the Wayback Machine and talk more about it. But tell me about your early career. You started out at Exxon, right?
I did. So I started at Exxon. I had an MBA out of Northwestern, which is in Chicago, but I grew up in Tennessee. So I interviewed with every company that came from a warm climate. And so Exxon is what ultimately brought me to Houston.
Oh, wow.
So I'm a big fan of Texas and the Houston climate. Some people complain about it, but I love it.
Well, that's because you know the climate up north like I do, right? So there's no fun standing in the snowbank waiting for the bus and wondering if it's going to come or not, right?
Yeah, no, it was the coldest winter in history that Chicago had ever had when I went there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I like to say that I survived both the coldest and the snowiest winter they'd ever had, and that was a true statement at least up until that point.
And then you got out of Dodge.
I got out of Dodge. Had a number of options. I could have taken a job in Chicago, but given the choice, I went to Exxon. And, the neat thing for me about Exxon was that about every 18 months or 2 years, they would rotate you to a different position. So I did some financial analysis.
Right.
I, at one point, had a marketing and sales territory from Texas to California to Alaska and sold industrial products and had people who worked for me who sold industrial products. And so I was fortunate to have a number of very different roles when I was there, which was really helpful for me then, has been helpful for me since then.
How long were you at Exxon?
I was there 15 years.
Okay.
For a while, I was actually the recruiting. Not many people know this, so this is a secret.
Great.
I was the recruiting team captain, recruiting Northwestern MBAs into Exxon. And if you were to ask me who is the most famous person that I have recruited from Northwestern to Exxon,
okay,
it is the current CEO. So I interviewed Darren Woods, the current CEO, on campus, and if I had not liked him, he never would have gone any further in our recruiting process and would never, wouldn't be the CEO of Exxon today. And I haven't ever told him that or reminded him of that. But, one day I, plan to remind him that.
Well, maybe the word will get out now.
Maybe so. Maybe he'll contact me and thank me for having referred him to the other parts of Exxon.
That's a cool story, actually.
Went to work.
Yeah. And then I went on to found and manage the Houston office of Viant Corporation, right? Which was the premier internet consulting firm back in the day.
Well, we like to think of ourselves as the premier internet consulting firm. We were, this was back during the .com when a lot of corporations like what was Compaq at the time was trying to, they started with a distributor business. We're trying to get online. And so we were helping them. And so we were a startup, but we were started in Silicon Valley, got VC funding from a couple of the tier 1 firms. And then I was recruited over first into the Dallas office, and then I moved down to Houston because of spending all my time at Compaq initially. Ultimately, Compaq became the largest client that Viant had. We went public I joined them in 98. We went public in 99. Goldman Sachs took us public. And so we had a wild ride up the .com, along with a number of other .coms.
Well, Compaq was just really getting rolling at that point. When I started Softtech in 97, Compaq was also my first client. So I was out there, probably same area that you were at, wandering the halls and the habit trails that they had, right? So you didn't have to go out in the Houston heat. But yeah, back then there was no internet. Actually, I was just getting started, and they had, I remember, I think Banyan was the email program. It was like basically inter-company communication, because no one emailed anybody else, right? Yeah. You only emailed people in your own company. And when they were getting online, so that was actually on the internet then, that you're trying to help them?
It was. Mm-hmm. So Dell started as an online business, and Compaq was behind them, and they were trying to figure out what strategy should they use to catch up without irritating or disrupting their distributor network. And so we were helping them implement internet tools to be able to sell more efficiently online. And so I spent my first year and a half with Viant really planted up at the Compaq office. And then we convinced the corporation to open an office here. So I then traveled and walked the downtown area of Houston and found a building where we could lease out a whole floor. So we leased out a floor for 5 years. Now, of course, that was the .com era that people don't remember these days, but around 2000, 2001, the demand started to fall off a cliff. And while we were still in temporary space, designing our full floor, then the demand started to implode.
The bottom fell out.
And so ultimately, we had grown to 12 offices around the world, about 2,000 employees, and then there were 3 offices of Viant closed in December of 2000. We were not one of them, but then in the second wave of closures, the Houston office was closed in kind of the middle of 2001. Ultimately, Viant was acquired by another company in a roll-up after they had gone public, of course. But so it was an amazing ride, and I got to see how hard it is, the contrast between a big company like an Exxon, that all of its processes are well thought out and implemented, and they have lots of resources and support, to going to work for a startup. And we opened an office here, hired 40 people, and we were figuring out everything as we went along. So I got my first taste of the challenges that founders face.
It's
you have faced.
Well, this is true. I mean, it is a very different experience going from a large company to a small company where, like you said, everything's already thought out. All the processes are there generally. Small company, you're making it up as you go along. I mean, literally, right? Yeah. And some days you're taking out the trash, other days you're writing code or whatever else needs to be done. And I'm not sure when that changes exactly. But
I don't know either. But the saying that I like is if you're going to found a startup company or work for a startup, you got to be prepared to take out the garbage. And I kind of like that. What it means is you have to be able to be willing to do everything and not to expect to have a big infrastructure of people to support everything you do. And some people make that transition, and some people don't make that transition successfully. But I kind of like it, and I guess that's why I've stayed kind of in this arena, kind of in this space. One of the other things that we did at Viant was Enron became a customer of ours, and so people don't remember Enron anymore. But Enron had by dollar volume, the largest online trading platform that existed at that time in the 2000 timeframe, because they traded commodities through Enron online. And it was great to see. So the CEO of Enron came into one of our meetings, Ken Lay, and we worked for the woman who headed up the trading organization in developing some of their front-end tools to help their Enron online. So
interesting.
It was neat. And so it was before the downfall of Enron. So it was in a period of time where Enron could do no wrong.
Well, at least you didn't get sucked into that other side of the vortex of Enron, right?
No, we didn't.
You dodged a bullet, I think.
We did. But, interesting to have seen, been on the inside to see what it was like before their troubles began. Were viewed as the best practices in the energy industry. So, it was great to see. And then to kind of see how things progressed with Enron over time.
Well, I'm sure they actually did a lot of things right. They had to in order to grow like that and be as successful as they were. And then some portion of the company lost their way. But
they hired, in some ways, having a success like first Compaq and another success of Enron, both those companies and companies like that hire lots of really bright people. And then ultimately, say the case of Enron, those people, when they left Enron, then go start other companies. And so probably there's a lot of startups, successful startups, especially energy startups, that can trace their heritage back to people who got their initial experience at a company like Enron or Compaq.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then they want to take what we call the red pill and leave the corporate world and free fall into the startup world. And because it is a different world. And now you're the managing director at the Rice Alliance.
Yes.
And for those listening that aren't familiar, tell us about the Rice Alliance and the work that you do there.
Well, sure. Well, I will say first, it was perfect timing or serendipity for me, is that the Rice Alliance was founded in 2000. And I was a judge at the very first Rice Business Plan competition in 2001.
Okay.
And I was a sponsor of the Rice Alliance before joining it. So a little over a year after it was founded, the tenure faculty member who founded it said, I need to hire somebody to come run it and manage it and help grow it, so that person could get back to their teaching and research and publishing. And so at the same time, I was looking around I actually thought I was going to take about a year off and figure out what I wanted to do next. It turned out to be about 2 months that I took off because the opportunity to come on board and lead the Rice Alliance.
And did you know this person, or how did you get?
I did. So as an internet consultant and technology developer, we were looking for startups that we could build their websites for and help build their web businesses. And so I was engaged with the Rice Alliance to identify startups that we could do work for in terms of helping to build their companies. So I knew the founder of the Rice Alliance, and that's how I got involved in judging the Rice Alliance.
Right, and he knew you.
Plan, the first,
right?
And he knew me. And so I was fortunate to be brought on board. And so, the mission of the Rice Alliance, kind of to get to your question, the mission of the Rice Alliance is to help support entrepreneurs who are starting tech companies. And those entrepreneurs can be either Rice University related entrepreneurs or affiliated entrepreneurs, faculty, staff, students who think they have an idea to start a company but don't know how to do it. And it can also be, we broadened our mission to include entrepreneurs in the community, entrepreneurs from Houston and Texas, because what we want to do from the very beginning, the mission was to help Rice play the role in Houston that Stanford has played in Silicon Valley and MIT has played in Boston. Up until that point, there's a saying at Rice that most of the folks or focus of Rice was inside the hedges. And literally there is, if you've been on the Rice campus, there's about a 3-mile loop around Rice, and there's a track where people run and jog around Rice, and there's hedges around Rice. And so we had this saying that, Rice played inside the hedges before then. And so part of the mission of the Rice Alliance was to help Rice University have an impact outside the hedges. And the way we were going to have the impact was to help support technology entrepreneurs and to help make Houston a leading center of technology entrepreneurship. And that's been the kind of guiding light and mantra from the very beginning. And I would say, that vision really hasn't changed over the years.
And it's actually is it the #1 business plan competition, or it's one of the top, right?
Oh, the way we say it is, maybe some folks will argue with this, but based on our research, we're the largest and richest student startup competition in the world. So we're not aware of any startup competition that involves an intercollegiate competition.
Because people come from colleges from all over the world, actually, to compete in this, right?
They do. The first year that we had the competition, we had 9 universities compete for $10,000 in prize money.
Okay.
This year, we had 42 universities from around the world compete for $2 million in prize money.
That's amazing.
The first year, we had 45 judges. This year, we had about 275 judges at the competition, including folks from SoftTech, and SoftTech Venture Studios. Yeah. And, you guys have put up a investment prize. So the largest portion of the prize money at the competition is investment. And that's so helpful because that's the money that gets these companies started and off the ground.
Right.
And so they come to the competition, they meet investors like you, and then they go ahead and get the first funding, the seed funding, to get their company started. And so it has been a great boom to it.
Yeah, I think that's great, $2 million in prizes. Although I would like to talk to you about how do we get another zero on that, right? Because it's a lot of work for these companies, and even $10,000, is okay. It's a lot of money, but on the other hand, businesses require a lot of money, right?
They do.
So, and we have so much money in Houston and so many sponsorship opportunities. It's like, well, why shouldn't the top 7 be getting 100,000 or more minimum, right? From some of these sponsorships. So I think we'll get there. I mean, you've already 200x'd from where you started. So we only have to do another 10x, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, that's our goal. When you look at the 7 finalists, we track every company that comes through the competition forever, meaning until they either have an exit, they go public, or they're continuing to grow their companies. And we know that there have been around 275 successful companies come through the competition. Those companies have raised $4.6 billion in funding.
Wow. With
a B. And then we've had 5 companies go public so far that we're at the competition. And the market value of those companies is over $5 billion, in addition to the $4.6 billion that have been raised by all the companies. And so we've seen huge success. And the other thing that we've tracked is, so of the companies that go all the way to the finals, how do they do relative to the total 42 companies that we invite? And do they do better? In other words, are the judges picking the right companies?
Right.
And so the data supports that, in fact, the judges are.
Oh, really?
So that some percentage, like almost 90% of the companies that make it to the final round go on to be successful. And sometimes it's not the winning company that ultimately is the most successful. It might be the runner-up or the third place company. So it's for more ammunition, I think, to your point, that if we had a pool of money that we could provide $100,000 investment for all 7 of the finalists, I think the return on that would be pretty strong.
I think you're right. I would like to see that.
So it's a track. What it's done. The prize money is nice, but what it's done is I think it's put Houston on the map. So I have a judge who used to travel from Silicon Valley every year, and he's a Rice alum, and he used to say, man, I'm so glad that the world's richest and largest student startup competition is in Houston, when everybody would have said, where would that be if we hadn't already been here? They would say, oh, well, it'll obviously be in Silicon Valley, or it'll be in Boston. But the fact that it's here in Houston is a way to showcase the power that we have in Houston, both the investment community that we have here and the corporations that are here that support entrepreneurship and companies that support entrepreneurship. So, I'm really proud that it's here in Houston and not somewhere else.
Yeah, well, myself included. I mean, Houston just has so much to offer. And then that's been one of the challenges over the last, since I was an entrepreneur, right? So when I started my entrepreneurial journey 35 years ago, really the only thing available in Houston was maybe SCORE, right? Yeah. Society of Retired Executives, I think. And so it's like, well, I've got a tech company, right? I mean, okay, they'll be able to coach me on business, but who am I going to get to help me with technology? And then on top of that, people would ask me, oh, you must know a lot of startup founders in Houston. I'm like, well, no, not really. First of all, I've got my head down working, right? Second of all, I'm not sure where to find those people because there weren't any startup development organizations or anything really in Houston up to that point. So Like most things and most hockey sticks, right? I think there's been a period of time where that's been growing, and people like yourself and the Rice Alliance have been encouraging this ecosystem, and it takes time for it to start like exponentially taking off, right? And I think we're just right there kind of turning that corner where I think we're going to see some tremendous growth over the next few years about, both the investment and the startup ecosystem here in Houston.
I do too. I've seen a lot of change and development, and I think you're right. The trajectory in Houston is changing. And, I've seen a lot happen over the last 5 years. If I look over the history of the Rice Alliance, I think we've had almost 3,000 or maybe slightly more than 3,000 startups come through the program and raise more than $23 billion in funding. And nobody would have thought that would have happened 20 years ago.
Yeah, over those 20 years, you've seen a lot of change. So how has the landscape changed for you over that period of time?
Yeah, it continues to get better and better in Houston, I think. We see more investors who are interested in investing in early stage companies, both angels and venture capital firms. And even some private equity firms are now getting into the early stage private equity, or they're waiting. They're there to provide the growth funding for these tech startups that exist. And so the investment community is one side. The city itself, I think, has developed the ecosystem of support organizations. A big one is the ION, which is Rice. We were really fortunate at the right place at the right time for our former president, David Lebron, as he was ending the latter part of his tenure as president. So he was president, I think, for about 18 years.
Wow.
And the timing was right because he said, I want to leave my legacy, my mark on Houston, and how can I do that? And I think he has sealed his legacy by committing over $100 million of Rice's money to invest in the Houston, the ION Innovation District.
Wow.
It's 16 acres. And the first couple parts of that are complete. So the ION officially opened earlier this year, which was that old Sears department store. And I think the legacy of that that department store for Sears was really ahead of its time. I think it was the first moving escalator in Houston. And so people used to go there, not only to shop, but to ride the escalator. I think it was one of the first moving escalators in Houston.
An anecdote, my mother-in-law worked there, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, so...
Sears was the Amazon of its day.
Exactly.
And, it, like many large companies, I think, failed to adapt and change to the new environment. Competition was first, the Targets and the Walmarts of the world. And it just shows the impact of new companies that come along. But being there at that location is sort of, we've sort of saved, instead of demolishing the entire building, they have retrofitted that building, added 2 stories to it. So it's got almost 300,000 square feet of space to help provide an ecosystem for startups and people who want to help support these startups. And I attribute David Lebron and the impact that he wanted to have there. And the fact that, the nice thing about this is Rice isn't going to go anywhere. Rice has been around 110 years. Or so, and it'll be around forever. And it's committed to making that whole, not just the ION itself, but that whole innovation district successful. And I think that that's different than some of the innovation ecosystems around the country and the innovation districts around the country, is that you've got a university that's not going to go anywhere and has committed its money to it. And so, I think the city of Houston will see the benefit of it. Similar to in Chicago, they opened up a facility at the old Merchandise Mart called 1871.
Oh, really?
Backed by the Pritzker family there. And so what we saw was that where at one time Chicago wasn't even on the entrepreneurship map, opening up 1871 put it on the map. And I think the ION is going to do the same thing to Houston.
Well, I think it's working already. In fact, I just came from the Tejano Tech Summit, first one that they've done, and there was over 100 people there. And we put on an event earlier this year at Chili Cook-Off where we're bringing the different startup development organizations together at the Ion. And it'll still take, the Ion is the first, like you said, they've got a pretty big plan. I think it's going to take 10 or 15 years for them to actually get it all built out. But that's what you need to have with vision, right?
Yeah.
So, and Rice leading it, like you said, having that institution anchoring that, it's going to happen. Right?
I think so too. And I think the other thing that our President Lebron did right was he said, look, this is not the Rice Ion. This is the Ion. So you don't see Rice's name anywhere in the building. In fact, before he announced it, he went to the presidents of all the other institutions in Houston and said, hey, look, we want you to sign on as a partner to us. And so I think he had an intent of not trying to make it a competitive space, but to make it a collaborative space where all the other institutions wanted to be a part of it and agreed to be a part of it. And he did that before he even announced it. And, he didn't have to do that. And I think it's in the Rice culture to be, to be strong and to foster excellence, but to foster a collaborative spirit as well.
Well, definitely outside the hedge now.
Definitely. We operate that same way. So about 10 years ago, we launched the AlSpark Startup Accelerator, a tech accelerator. But after about year 2 or year 3, we saw that the University of Houston at the same time had launched the Red Labs Accelerator. And so the directors of those two centers, so the Rice Alliance runs AlSpark and some other folks at U of H run Red Labs. I think on year 2 or year 3, we said, what doesn't make any sense for us to run 2 separate independent programs each during the summer and then require speakers to first go to U of H and give a talk and then run and drive across town to Rice and give a talk. Let's combine the 2 accelerator programs together. And so for the last 8 years or so, we've been running those programs together, co-located. So mentors who mentor companies, the startups, they can mentor startups from the U of H and from Rice at the same time. And speakers, when they speak, they're speaking to both U of H and to Rice students at the same time. And then we said, well, look, instead of having 2 demo days, let's have 1 demo day. And we named the demo day after the football game between U of H and Rice, which I think is called the Bucket Bowl or the Bayou Bucket Bowl, something like that. And so we call it the Bayou Startup Showcase. And it's where you get to see both the startups at Rice and the startups at U of H at the same time.
Do they do that at the Ion now, or where did they do that before?
We have done it in different places across campus. We've done it at Rice and we've done it at U of H. We've rotated at different places. Going forward, we hope to be able to host the demo day, the Bayou Startup Showcase at the Ion going forward. And
when does it typically take place? Is it always the same time? It's in the summer.
It's in the summer because most of the individuals are students, and so they're able to focus full-time on their startups during the summer. So we start the program in May and we end the program in mid-August. And so we just completed our 10th year of the cohorts and the Bayou Startup Showcase.
Interesting.
This summer.
Any particular startups that have stood out to you over the years?
Wow, there are a number of startups that we've seen over the years that have come through our programs. A couple of startups. One is a startup that came out of an invention out of Rice Labs. It was a way to be able to generate hydrogen much more efficiently and therefore more cheaply and more sustainably. The company's named Syzygy, and now they've raised several rounds of funding and have become hugely successful as a startup company, and maybe one of the startups that helps address the energy challenge or the energy transition and the need to provide more sustainable energy. Another one is a company that came through our program called originally, when they went through AlSpark, were called Big Delta Systems.
Okay.
Big Delta Systems doesn't tell you what it was at all. It was a battery technology company that came out of one of the labs at Rice, Dr. Ajayan's lab. And at the time, their original strategy was they could provide develop a battery in any form factor at all. But that company has pivoted since then. And a couple of weeks ago, they just launched a new 90,000 square foot manufacturing facility to manufacture batteries, lithium batteries, and the factory is in Ohio, but it will be able to begin to produce more of the batteries in the U.S. versus having to rely on overseas manufacturing of batteries to supply companies like Tesla and the exploding, EV, electric vehicle market.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was for EVs.
It has multiple applications, you can guess, because lithium batteries are used in all kinds of different applications, but they have a technology that is able to produce batteries more flexibly and more efficiently.
Interesting.
So a 90,000 square foot facility, and it was a company that years ago came through Allspark, and the founders of it were 3 PhD students out of Rice.
Really?
Yeah, and so they, of course, needed mentoring. We connected them with a venture capitalist, a clean energy venture capitalist from Silicon Valley, Annette Finsterbush. And so Annette was a corporate VC in clean energy at the time. So she initially, for the first couple of years, was mentoring those PhD students. Well, at some point she said, I can help you better by becoming the CEO of the company. So she is now the CEO of the company and has been driving now their growth as they go into the growth phase.
Nice.
And it's been a terrific ride for her and for the company now. And it's going to, I think, be great for the country because we need more battery capacity. We need to expand the ability to produce batteries at a much cheaper price so that we can then kind of help drive the transition to electric vehicles.
Exactly. So much misinformation out there about EVs. If you look at social media, it's just so many times I just want to chime in on a conversation because it's like, you just have it exactly wrong, because of Hurricane Ian that went through, like, for example, when they're talking about batteries and car fires and stuff. And it's like, and this was one I did actually weigh in on. It was like, well, here's an article that actually shows that there are like 3,000 or 3,500 car fires per year are from hybrid vehicles and like 1,500 gas vehicles. And the number of EV-related car fires is 25. So this is not actually a problem. Of course, an EV catches fire, it burns in a different way, but the fire department, they just have to adapt because this is the future. It's not going anywhere.
Well, what's exciting to me about this area is that over our lifetimes and even in the recent, last 10 years, technology is advancing so fast.
Right.
And what's clear is we need batteries that have a longer range. So you want to be able to drive 500 or 600 miles on one charge. And then batteries that can hold a greater charge and batteries that can be produced more cheaply. So the cost of these batteries is going to continue to come down. And the amount of energy that they can then store is going to continue to go up. And so while, people may argue, I can only get 300 miles on, my current vehicle, what I think is going to happen is that range is going to continue to grow and the cost of that is going to continue to come down and be more and more competitive as we go along because of advances in technology, because of what, that's one of the things that's exciting about being in academia is that there are researchers, not just at Rice, but at all the major institutions that are out there trying to figure out how to solve the problems that we need to get solved today, of being able to store more from battery technology, being able to produce batteries that are cheaper. And we see that happening.
And charge faster.
I
mean, I was never one of those that was really that worried about running out of oil. Because I was like, well, that's just a problem that's going to be solved. And then the market economics change as that happens, right? Maybe oil gets more expensive, it gets more rare, other opportunities, people come into the market to fill a need, and, some faith, I guess, in science to solve the problem. And you just know they're going to continue to solve this, right?
Well, you do. And you touched on the oil and gas industry has done amazing things to be able to produce more oil more cheaply, using different technologies and being able to produce more oil of when they find a reservoir, being able to increase the percentage of oil they're able to get up to the surface.
Right.
And while people complain, I mean, I started my career at Exxon, and so maybe I'm a little biased on this, but people complain about the cost of gasoline, but I'm paying more for a gallon of milk than I'm paying for a gallon of gasoline. And you think about the complexity of getting oil from 1,000 or 5,000 feet under the ground, finding it, bringing it to the surface, refining it, and then bringing it to your retail gas station versus the process of getting milk. The process is so much more complicated.
Or let's just consider how much they're paying for a gallon of bottled water if you add it up.
Well, it's like
they're just putting water in a bottle, right? And it's like compared to like going to the bottom of an ocean and pumping it up. Right. It's just amazing.
And I will say that, people think, I know some people may think, well, 10 years we'll have transitioned away from oil and gas, or 20 years we will. And, I think the transition's going to be a lot longer than many people think, and maybe longer than people want. But at the same time, the industry is finding ways to offset the impacts of oil and gas by being able to capture CO2 directly from the air. There's direct air capture technology that looks like it could be a game changer. There's also carbon capture sequestration. That a number of major energy corporations are establishing or have established major projects in there. So I think what we're going to see is that the oil and gas industry is going to, all the major companies over the last 5 years or so have established these net zero carbon targets. And I think the technology is out there and is being developed that is going to enable that to take place. At the same time, the battery and electric technology is developing as well.
Well, there's very interesting ways that can play out. I mean, I've been driving electric cars for 10 plus years now, right? And the truth is, most people don't go 300 miles in a day. Like, I don't have to go to a supercharger. I charge at home, charge at night. People worry about the grid, but hey, by the way, the grid peaks during the day, right? There's a lot of capacity at night. Yeah. And then some interesting ideas too of like, well, what if, for example, all these cars are plugged in, can actually feed back into the grid if this was set up this way to where it's like, oh, we have all this power stored everywhere. And if we actually need it, it could go the other way. So I'm a big believer in how technology can solve these problems. And you pointed a few of them out. There's anything that you want to talk about, innovative technology-based research projects happening at Rice? Is that something that you're involved in?
Well, sure. And we have, one of our missions is to help take technologies out of the lab and help get it to the marketplace, because there is a great awareness now that it's one thing to create technologies inside a lab and solve problems in the lab, but unless you can apply those to solve a problem in the world, you're not getting the societal benefit that you need. And, it's encouraging to me, the National Science Foundation, they sponsor billions of dollars of research every year. But in roughly 2010, between 2010 and 2014, they created a program in order to help identify the potential markets for technologies that they had helped fund in the research. And it's called the Innovation Core Program. And so we've been involved in the Innovation Core, or I-Core for short, program since 2014. And so we help take technologies, help those faculty members and PhD students who work for them to understand who their potential customers are, what problem are they solving, and how big is the market, and who's willing to pay for it. And there have been hundreds of companies. I think the last number I saw was over 1,000 companies that have been founded who had gone through the National Science Foundation I-Core program. And so, because there's an awareness among the National Science Foundation and among Congress, who funds the NSF, to say, yeah, it's one thing to spend money on research, and that's important, but it's also important to have real-world applications and companies and startups founded through it. So it's encouraging to me to see that or groups like the NSF and the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense, the National Institute of Health, they're not only funding research, but they're putting money behind trying to create companies that will have a societal benefit for the world.
Yeah,
so it's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. I remember going up and touring. I was Compact's lab up in Boston, and I think maybe HP had recently acquired Compact, but there was all these researchers there doing really cool stuff, and they're just hungry to get their research into actual products. Like help me get this into like a compact product. And it was early days for facial recognition, and we were looking at developing cameras and how do we add smile detection, how we do this face detection, because of course it's on a desktop. It's very powerful, but how do we get it onto a chip that works on a camera? Yeah. Of course, eventually that's all happened, but how does something actually get from the lab into like a startup? So PhD students and faculty, they're working on this research, and how do they go off and form a startup, and somehow that's facilitated at through Rice? Or
so an example could be a company this year, the team the PhD team that represented Rice in the Rice Business Plan competition had a different kind of technology. It was a technology to extend the life of fruit. So it's a coating that is edible, FDA approved. There's nothing. It's a sustainable coating.
Something better than wax on an apple, I guess.
Exactly. A lot of wax. I sold wax one of my products I sold when I was at Exxon was wax. Oh. And there were FDA approved waxes, which is a byproduct of the refining process. So not a lot of people know that.
That so wax comes from oil and gas?
It can come from oil and gas as a byproduct of it. And we sold wax into a number of different applications, both candles, but also coatings that go on fruit. Now it's an FDA-approved wax, and it's clean, and it's no problem. But what it doesn't do is extend the life of fruit. And so the researchers at Rice have created a coating that is a biodegradable, bioedible coating that allows enough air moisture in and out of fruit in order to extend the life of that fruit. It can double or triple the life of fruit. And so you have a lot less waste and spoilage in the fruit, in the supply chain of fruit. And they went through the I-Corps program to understand and talk to customers to find out what problems they had. So they talked to the supermarkets, they talked to the growers. Then they competed and they created a business plan and presented that at the Rice Business Plan competition. And the next step is to create the startup. EpiFresh is the name of the company that went through the Rice Business Plan competition.
Okay.
And I think that it's an example of a company that can have a huge impact on that sector, on the food sector that they're going after, that will have a big benefit in terms of less spoilage. So everybody, I don't think there's anybody around who hasn't thrown away fruit that's gone bad in the refrigerator. And I'm certainly one of those. And I can think in the last week of fruit that I have had to throw away because we didn't eat it fast enough.
Shoot, and sometimes it doesn't get to the refrigerator. I mean, we get the food delivery in, and it's like you open it, and the raspberries are already moldy, and the fruit's already squishy, and you're like, who's doing this? Who's picking out this fruit? Why was it even on the shelf? So I think that's a critical need.
It is, and it's an example. A lot of the technologies I see are more hard tech, like the ability to have a new catalyst to produce hydrogen. Came out of a couple faculty's labs. Dr. Hallis was one, and that's one. And that company licensed the technology from Rice and created the company Syzygy. And one of the co-founders of Syzygy was a PhD student that came out of Rice that was working on technologies in the lab at the time. So some of those are very complex and relate to the energy sector, but so we see a number of technologies that come out of different labs at Rice.
That's great. Is there any critical piece that you feel still needs development to better support Houston entrepreneurs and startups?
Well, that's a great question. One that we get a lot. And, I think there's never enough. What I've seen evolve over the last 5 or 10 years, I answer it this way. One of the things that's evolved is that the energy corporations have all, as I alluded to earlier, they've all gotten behind the energy transition. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. And I'm not sure if I would have said that 5 years ago. I've seen a dramatic change. And most of the energy companies either have a corporate venture capital group that invest in these energy transition startups, or has a technology scouting group that they're looking for technologies that they can bring in and use in their corporation. We are the energy capital of the world today, and I think most people would agree with that. Our vision is that Houston is thought of as the energy transition capital of the world. And I think that Houston has all the pieces to enable us that there's no other place in the U.S. that has the components that are needed in order to be the energy transition leader. We have the research here. We have the investment funding around energy that's here. We have the corporations that are committed to this energy transition. And more importantly, I think we have the infrastructure to allow it to scale up. We have this energy infrastructure in Houston that's largely thought of as related to oil and gas. But I think that same infrastructure can be and will be repurposed in order to scale up for this energy transition future. So if I'm excited about anything, it's what we've seen in the last 5 years and the commitment behind energy, all the way from groups like the Greater Houston Partnership, the energy corporations, Greentown Labs that's opened a location here in Houston, the ION that exists to enable Houston to grow dramatically as a startup hub and as an energy transition hub. So, that's, I think, an opportunity for Houston that no other region in the U.S. has.
That's great. Well, is there any key learning from your experience that you wish you had known earlier?
Oh, that's good question. I don't think I fully understood how tough the startup life is, until I had a little bit of taste of that. And so I have a lot of empathy for the founders who go down that journey. And, we try to, I think it's made me think about how can we help the entrepreneur along that path. And the help is, it could be introductions to investors, or how do you pitch your business to investors, or it's mentors who have done it before and are willing to give back. Fortunately, I think there's a lot of successful entrepreneurs and successful investors in Houston who are willing to pay it forward. Like, I think, I'm not, we're not saying that just because I'm here, but I think, I think you epitomize that as someone who's been successful in the Houston community as a tech founder and who's now wanting to pay it forward and help, the founders that are now coming up. Because I think you understand how difficult it was, as you already alluded to, when you were starting your company, the infrastructure wasn't here.
Well, they say build what you can use, or you would have used, yes. Right? And so I think that's partly why I've been doing this. There was a need, there has been a need for a while, and it's great to see that a lot of people have now come in to help fill that need with 30 startup development organizations in Houston. We're proud to be part of that with our venture fund and studio, and tacking on our services to help these guys get their products built and scaled. But it's definitely an exciting time in Houston.
It is. And it's nice. I mean, I've seen, you're helping a large number of companies in the Houston area, plus companies that have come through the business plan competition. And the competition, one of the things we didn't expect was that it could be a catalyst to catalyze organizations to further help the ecosystem. An example of that is in 2005, 6 successful entrepreneurs came together to support the grand prize at the business plan competition. And at the time, they called themselves the Goose Society of Texas, just as Goose stands for Grand Order of Successful Entrepreneurs. It was kind of tongue-in-cheek. Now it's known as Goose Capital, and there are about 25 successful entrepreneurs who have joined that group. And now they give a grand, when they started, they gave a grand prize of $100,000. This year, they gave a grand prize of $350,000. But they have invested over $70 million in both Houston startups and business plan competition startups. So it has evolved into something that has helped to fill a gap of seed stage investment capital. At the same time, These are individuals who want to also mentor these startups and to help them be successful. So, we've seen more and more support from the ecosystem of people who want to, like you, have been successful and to want to give it back.
Yeah, I think that's the key part of the ecosystem, right? So one reason Silicon Valley works is that people, founders have their success, they build their companies, they exit, they have some money, now they stay around and they put that money into new startups, and essentially how the VC model was created. And in order to do that, you need to have people that are willing to put that money in, and you need to have the startups and the founders stick around too, right? Yes. And not have to go somewhere else to get other pieces of that puzzle, whether that's funding or help or mentorship or whatever. So I do think we have all of that here now.
I like to think Houston versus the other parts of the U.S., and you can tell me whether you agree. I like to think that Houstonians are more collaborative, and we have a more collaborative environment, although sure, we're all competitive, but we have a more collaborative environment that supports startups than maybe some other regions. I don't know if other regions would agree with that.
No, but I do think that you're right. Houston is very collaborative. And an example being that chili cook-off or some of the other things that are doing, I see people coming out and supporting each other at the different events, whether it's at the Ion or the Canon or our events, et cetera, right? So it's really important. Okay, some speed round questions. Name a recent book that you like.
Oh, okay. A recent book I like. A recent book that I actually like is a book called The Four Tendencies. And what it is a book that you can take a self-quiz and define your personality. And and there are other similar quizzes you can do, Myers-Briggs, and there's always 4 quadrants, and you pick your quadrant. This is the one that more closely epitomized myself. And when my spouse took it, she's in a different quadrant, and all of a sudden. And so, this is not necessarily this is a book that could be used in a business setting, but it's also in a relationship setting. And you can understand how different people think and what drives them. And all of a sudden, from a spousal relationship, we're like, the light bulbs went on. It's like, oh, okay, this is why, you work in a certain way, and this is why I work in a certain way. And that same thing is true about relationships in work. And you can see why people, what drives people in a certain way that enables them as a team to work better. And so I have done a number of these different, personality things, and I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of fits. I got to say, this is the one that was dead spot on. And I would actually recommend that everybody, whether it's for work or for personal relationship standpoint, the Four Tendencies.
I'll have to download that. The Four Tendencies sounds very interesting.
It does. I think you can do the quiz online, and it's a 5-minute quiz. Okay. And I did the 5-minute quiz online. It was free quiz. I think that was dead on. But then reading the book was dead on.
Did you do the quiz first or the book first?
I think I did the quiz first. I think I did the quiz first.
Interest.
It piqued my interest, and I was encouraged to do it. And I was kind of skeptical, like everybody is. It's just another personality quiz. But it was the one that was, like I said, spot on.
Interesting. Well, if you could grab lunch with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Gosh, that's a great question. At a personal level, I wish that, when you're young, you don't think about your parents in the same way. And so I would love to be able to go back and talk to my dad. He served in World War II, and he never talked about that experience.
Like so many of them didn't.
Like so many didn't, because they were either traumatized or they just didn't, I think men generations ago were taught not to talk about things like that. And I always thought that until my 13-year-old had to do a heritage class, show and tell for heritage. And so I said, hey, I have my dad's military uniform. And I said, how about you? And I have it in his footlocker that he had when he was in World War II. But I'd never opened it before. And so I said, hey, why don't you take this footlocker and you can take, my dad's uniform. And I always thought that my dad, because he landed in Europe after D-Day, I always thought, okay, so he was coming up from the rear, kind of doing cleanup and was never in active battle. And so, but I've always had this book that detailed what his division did. Turns out, and I never looked at it. And so because of my son's school project, I started to look at it. And sure enough, they were in military battle. They landed in France and then went into Germany. And they were one of the first U.S. divisions that came across a concentration camp in Germany. And I would love to hear his experience about that. And they went from town to town, retaking towns, but there were always German divisions, or not, they weren't divisions at that time. They probably left small squads of German military fighters at each of these small villages and told them, well, you're not allowed to surrender and you're not allowed to retreat. And so they went from town to town fighting, even though it was clearly apparent that the U.S. and the Allies were going to win the war. And so, it's just, it's something that I took for granted that he never had, his unit never saw military action. In fact, it did. And I would love to have learned about his experience and what that was like.
Interesting.
And what life was like in the 40s and the 50s coming home and the boom time of the post-World War II era. It had to have been an amazing and an interesting, very different time than today.
Wow. Yeah, so talk to your dad, right? And when you have the chance.
If I were to, you ought to, while you have the chance, explore with your parents. But of course, you don't realize that till you're an adult, and so.
Any new technologies that you have your eye on?
I think this. I've talked about several that I think are interesting. I think that battery technology is developing very quickly and will change the way transportation works. Autonomous driving is an interesting one to me, and I think it's not ready for prime time yet. So I'm a skeptic today. I think in Houston there's pizza delivery, but I'm really sort of skeptical about the technology in the near term. Long term, I think it'll be interesting, the autonomous vehicles, and I think autonomous flight is an interesting one. The Jetsons had this vision of being able to fly in a personal autonomous, flying vehicle. I'm skeptical in the short run, but I'm think in the long term, those things are going to be interesting and really be dramatic, have a dramatic impact on transportation longer term.
I think you're right. I mean, it's, they're going to get there. And what usually happens is it happens slow and then happens fast, right? Yeah. That exponential curve. So I think that they're kind of at that inflection point, and I'm fine with being able to call a car, get in, go somewhere and get out, and it goes away. And people will be like, why do you waste all this space for garages and everything, right? Yes. Unless you just want to have a car you want to drive on the weekend, why bother, right? Closing question. So how can someone find or connect with you?
Well, it's easy. A couple ways. They can Google Rice Alliance or Rice Alliance for Technology and Entrepreneurship. You can, if they want to reach me, you can Google Brad Burke, or you can go to the Rice website and look for me on the Rice website. But we're Alliance at Rice. We're alliance.rice.edu is our URL. But Google us, and we do lots of programs for. We do programs for Rice students, faculty, and staff, but we do even more programs for people from the community as well. We're in the middle of our Clean Tech Accelerator, our second cohort. Okay. And we have a demo day coming up at the ION on November 17th. So
how many startups are in that?
There's 17 startups this year in it.
Wow.
First cohort, we had 12. Second cohort, we invited 17 thinking that, a couple of them might turn us down. Well, nobody turned us down. So we're 40% bigger this year than last year. I hope that we're 40% bigger next year. and 40% the year after that. We have 17 startups coming in the accelerator. They're going to pitch for Demo Day coming up in November, on November 17th. And anybody can go see them at the Ion that day, but it is, they can find us through programs that we run or online. And we're wide open to try to help any founders or people who want to engage with founders. We're happy to do that.
So Brad, I like to wear different socks. I've got my cool Einstein socks on today. I see you've got your Rocket popsicle socks on, so you're a fan of socks. So we got you some socks for being on the podcast.
Oh, that's great.
I think might apply.
Oh, they do. I love it. It's owl socks. I don't have any owl socks like this.
Oh, great. I thought you probably have quite an owl collection, but I'm glad we found one that was one that not in your sock drawer.
That's terrific. What I'll really do is I will wear these anytime I'm going to be meeting with my boss, who's the dean of the business school, or the president of Rice. I'll make sure I wear my owl socks so
there you go.
I can show them off to the leadership at Rice. Sure. I really appreciate that. That's really nice. You didn't have to do that.
Yeah, you're welcome.